continue now at the top of Daf Tesvav Amud Beis and Meseches Rosh Hashana. This is Rosh Hashana Daf 15b. The Gemara now explains the Brisa Chisure Mechsera. There were words missing in the Brisa. V'hachi Katani, and this is how you should read the Brisa. Esrog achar lekitaso lemaiser v'achar chanata l'shvius. The first opinion is that when it comes to an esrog, we follow the time that it's picked in terms of determining which year it is, in terms of maisros. Is it a second year fruit? Is it a third year fruit, etc.? But we go by when it grows in terms of the Shemitah year, in terms of the halachas of shvius. That is both regarding the halachas of biur and the halachas of hefker. V'Rabboseinu nimnu b'usha, and the sages, they voted in usha, and they said, achar lekitasa, you always follow when it's picked, bein lemaiser, bein l'shvius, whether we're talking about maiser, whether we're talking about shvius. And the point, again, of the Gemara is that there actually is a machlokas tanoim in this regard. When it comes to esrog, do we follow chanata, or do we follow lekita when it comes to shvius? And that will answer for Rabba and Rav Hamnuna as well. And Rashi over here explains, v'Rabba v'Rav Hamnuna svir lu kavtulmas, both Rabba and Rav Hamnuna, they'll hold like avtulmas. The Omar Basar Chanata l'Shvius, who says that we follow the year that it grows in terms of the halachas of Shvius. Hilkach bas Shvius shenichneses l'shmines chayeves bebiur. Therefore, again, if it grew in the 7th year, was picked in the 8th year, it's going to be chayev in biur like a 7th year fruit. Ubas shishes hanichneses l'Shvius, and if it grew in the 6th year and it was picked in the 7th year, peturim in biur, it's going to be pater from biur, again like a 6th year fruit. The Azal Basar Chanata, they both agree we follow the year that it grows. Umiflag pligi Rabba v'Rav Hamnuna b'milsi d'Avtulmas baha. However, Rabba and Rav Hamnuna have one dispute within Avtulmas' opinion. Rav Hamnuna holds Kavan de Petura min habiur, since it is pater from biur, so chayev is b'maiser, so automatically it's chayev in maiser in such a situation. The lav hefker de malki, because that means by definition it's not a shmita year fruit, it's not hefker according to the Torah, and therefore it's chayev in maiser. The Rabba Savar, but Rabba holds sof. No, at the end of the day, yada kol memashmashin, even in a situation where really it is a 6th year fruit, but if you picked it in the 7th year, so everyone was touching it, the whole field was hefker, umod avtulmas, so he says that avtulmas would admit the pturim in a meiser, that it's going to be pater from meiser, even in that situation. And the Gemara continues, Itmar, it was learned, Rabbi Yochanan v'Reish Lakish, Amri Tarvayu, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, they both say, Esrog bas shishes shenichnas al shvius. If you have an esrog that grew in the 6th year and was picked in the 7th year, liolam shishes, it's always considered a 6th year. As Rashi says, it's going to be chayiv and meiser. It's going to be pater from biur. It's not going to be considered shmita produce. Kiyasa Ravin Amar Rabbi Yochanan, when Ravin came, he said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Esrog bas shisha shenichnas al shvius. If you have an esrog that grew in the 6th year and it entered into the 7th year, afilo kezayis, even if it only grew a kezayis, it only grew a small amount in the 6th year. V'nasis kikor, but it became much larger, it became like a loaf in the 7th year, it became much larger. Chayav in olam misham tevel, you're still chayiv in terms of the halachas of tevel, meaning it's considered to be a 6th year fruit because the beginning of its growth was in the 6th year, and therefore it's chayiv in meiser. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Ilan shachantu peiros of kodem tu b'shvat. Let's say you have a tree where the fruits formed before tu b'shvat. So mesaser, so in terms of the halachas of meiseros, l'shana sha'avra, you go by the previous year. Achar tu b'shvat, let's say the fruits formed after tu b'shvat, mesaser l'shana haba, then you go by the coming year. This is regards to, let's say you're trying to determine whether it's the 2nd year or the 3rd year of the Shemitah cycle in terms of the halachas of meiseros, so you go by tu b'shvat as the Rosh Hashana. And the Brisa continues, Amar Rav Nechemya says, B'amed devarim amurim, when is this true? Be'ilan sha'osa shtei brechos b'shana. When you're talking about a tree that it produces fruits 2 times during the year. So the Gemara says, Shtei brechos al kadaitach, you really think 2 brechos? Rashi over here explains, Shtei brechos al kadaitach ein lashon zeh nofel ela ba'ofos. This language really only applies to birds, like the word brecha. So how could you use the word brechos when it comes to trees? And so the Gemara explains, what it means to say is, if it's as if it makes 2 brechos, as Rashi over here says, when we're talking about a tree where all the fruits don't finish at once. Could go into Einim, for example, by figs. We said similarly by kitnios as well. They come in different sets. So in such a situation, that's where we're going to say this halach here of Tu B'Shvat being the Rosh Hashana. But if you have a tree where all the fruits finish at the same time, could go in, for example, Dekalim, V'Zeisim, V'Charuvin. Let's say you're talking about date trees or olive trees or carobs. Even though some of the fruits might have finished or might have been formed rather before Tu B'Shvat, Misasrin L'Shana Haba. still the Meiser goes for the coming year. In other words, Rabbi Nechemia seems to be saying we follow the year that the fruit is actually picked. As Rashi over here says, Avol ilon shepeirosav nilkotin ke'echad. What he means to say is if you have a tree where all the fruits are collected at one time, that's what it means, that it's one brecha as opposed to two. So basar lakita is linan buhu. So then we go by the time when we actually pick the fruits. We don't go by when the fruit is formed. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rabbi Yochanan says, Nohagu ha'am b'cheruvin k'Reb Nechemia. The custom is the people follow by cheruvin, by carobs, they follow Reb Nechemia, meaning by carob trees. We say that it goes by when the carobs are actually picked and not by when they are formed. The Gemara continues, Eizvei Reish Lakish l'Reb Yochanan. Reish Lakish asked Reb Yochanan the following question. This is a question from a Mishnah in Shvius. The Mishnah says, B'no shuach shviya shalohen sheniya. When it comes to white figs, so we say that the fruits that grow in the second year, or the fruits that are picked in the second year, those are going to be considered Shemitah fruits, because it takes 3 years for those kind of fruits to grow. Rashi over here says, in the second year of the Shemitah cycle, those fruits, we're going to treat them like Shemitah fruits, because it takes 3 years for them to grow. Meaning, the fruit that formed during the Shemitah year, those fruits are not going to be finished until the second year of Shemitah. And when it comes to the halachas of Shvius, we follow when the fruit was actually formed, and therefore it says in this Mishnah, we're going to treat these fruits like Peiros Shvius, again, because they formed in the Shemitah year. So basically, Reish Lakish is asking Rabbi Yochanan, it seems very clear that when it comes to the Benos Shuach, we follow when the fruit is actually formed. Yeah, Rabbi Yochanan said by Cheruvin, by Carobs, we follow Rabbi Nechemia, and we go by when it's picked. So the Gemara says, Ishtik, Rabbi Yochanan was quiet, he didn't answer Reish Lakish's question. So Amar le Rabbi Abba HaKohen, Rabbi Yossi HaKohen. So Rabbi Abba HaKohen said to Rabbi Yossi HaKohen, Amai Ishtik, why was Rabbi Yochanan quiet? Leimole, what he should have said to him was as follows. Amino loch ano Reb Nechemia. I'm telling you what Reb Nechemia's halach is, we follow when it's picked. Viat amrli Rabbanan, and you're telling me something according to the Rabbanan. So he said back, no, Mishum Damar Le, because he would have said right back to him, Shavakt Rabbanan v'yavaret Reb Nechemia, you're going to leave aside the opinion of the Rabbanan, and you're going to follow Reb Nechemia. That wouldn't have been a good response from Reb Yochanan. But the Gemara continues, but still he should have said to him, I'm telling you what their custom is. And you're telling me what the prohibition is, okay? So you're saying that really we have to follow when the fruit is formed. It's prohibited to follow the Lakita, but I'm telling you the custom is Lakita. So the Gemara says, no, Damar Le, because he would have said back to Rabbi Yochanan, if you have a situation of an Isra, you're going to allow people to do the wrong thing. But the Gemara continues, but still Rabbi Yochanan say to him, I was talking about Meiser by Cheruvin, which is something that's only Midrabanan. And you're giving me a case of Shvius that's on a Doraisa level. And this is referring to the fact that, as we've mentioned previously, that when it comes to the halachas of Meiser on a Doraisa level, it only applies to grapes and olives. So when you're talking about Cheruvin, it's only Dindrabanan. And the question was from a Mishnah in Shvius talking about the halachas of the Shemitah year. That, of course, applies on a Doraisa level. So the Gemara says, Elo Amar Rabbi Abba HaKohen, rather Rabbi Abba HaKohen says, to Mieni, you're right, I'm surprised. If Reish Lakish would even ask a question from this Mishnah in Shvius on Rabbi Yochanan, they have nothing to do with each other, like we just said. Meiser Cheruvin is a din d'Rabbanan, and the halacha in the Mishnah in Shvius is talking about Shvius, and it's a din d'Oraisa. But the Gemara says, 1 second, Im Heshiva, you're wondering whether Reish Lakish asked the question. So we know that Reish Lakish asked the question. Rather, Ema im Kibla Rabbi Yochanan im lo Kibla. What he was really saying was, I'm not sure if Rabbi Yochanan accepted the question or not. Rashi over here says, im Kibla, v'haidi ishtik mishum de lo yada lo hashiv. Was it that Rabbi Yochanan was quiet because he didn't have an answer? Im lo Kibla, or maybe he didn't even think it was a question, he didn't even have to respond. V'haidi ishtik mishum de lo ichbisle. He was quiet because he didn't even care about the question, it was totally irrelevant. De lo dami meiser peiros ilan de rabbanan lachmure beik, shvias do raisa. There's no comparison to the halachas of meiser peiros ilan, which is only midrabbanan, to be so strict like you're going to be strict by shvias, which is a doraisa halacha. And we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Tez Zayin Amud Aleph.